Hi there, it's James Herman here, your Master of Advertising Effectiveness Program Director, and today I want to touch on some of the stuff that marketing professor Scott Galloway has been saying about brands and advertising in recent times.
I think advertising kind of outs you as not getting it.
Yeah, we'll come back to that in a second. But the reason I'm doing this is because on my program, I teach the evidence based principles of advertising effectiveness. And what I mean by that is that there is a very broad base of empirical evidence behind those principles. They're not my reckons or my anecdotal observations about how I personally relate to advertising or my predictions of how advertising may or may not go in the future. These are generalizable patterns that we see across loads of data from every category all over the world. And that's important, and it should be the academic standard that educators like me and Scott are held to ensure we're not misinforming people about how brands and advertising work. Now, of course, Scott has a much bigger audience than I have. He's much wealthier and more successful than I am. And I really like so much of what he has to say. He has thoughtful, insightful perspectives on a very broad range of important topics. And I think he's right about a lot of things. But what bemuses me is why he's so often wrong about marketing and advertising. Take this, for example.
What do the companies that have added over $100 billion in value in the last decade have in common? They don't advertise.
Really? I'm pretty sure that's not true, but maybe he doesn't really believe that. He was just having a kind of memory lapse that day.
If you look at every company that's built more than $100 billion in market cap within a 3-year period in the last 20 years, they all have one thing in common. They spend almost no money on traditional advertising.
Nope, he really does think that, and he sounds pretty confident about it. So let's look at the data. And let's start with the companies that have added $100 billion in enterprise value over the past couple of decades. Now, that's a massive amount of value to add. And so there aren't many companies who've achieved it, but some have. And those companies are Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Netflix, Alphabet, Meta, Tesla, Nvidia, OpenAI, Tencent, Alibaba, ByteDance, T-Mobile, and Eli Lilly. For comparison, any company that spends over $1 billion annually on advertising is a huge advertiser, in the top 20th of a percent of all advertisers. The top 50 biggest advertisers in the world spend $1 billion or more each year. So let's look at our list of companies that have added $100 billion in valuation over the past 2 decades. Apple spends about $7 billion a year on advertising. Microsoft spends about $5 billion. Amazon is the biggest advertiser in the world, spending more than $20 billion a year. Alphabet spends around $9 billion. Meta about $2 billion. Alibaba about $10 billion. ByteDance about $19 billion. T-Mobile about $2 billion. And Eli Lilly and Netflix about $1.5 billion each.
All the big players don't spend that much.
Well, they do.
How much advertising does Netflix, Google?
Over $10 billion a year.
I can't think of the last Amazon commercial I saw.
Well, they made and ran $20 billion worth last year, including dozens of TV ads. Pretty much all of them are among the world's largest advertisers. Now, Scott's right about OpenAI and Nvidia. They have relatively low advertising spends, but Nvidia still spends about $100 million annually, and OpenAI ran a Super Bowl spot in traditional media in 2025. Tesla has historically spent little but have begun to advertise, and there's no reporting on Tencent's annual ad spend, so we can't touch on that. But it's absolutely false to say that those companies don't advertise or that they spend very little in traditional media. They are among the biggest advertisers in the world and are commonly seen in traditional media environments like television and outdoor. So if advertising outs you as not getting it,
I think advertising kind of outs you as not getting it.
then Apple, Google, TikTok, Nvidia, OpenAI don't get it, which makes me wonder who does get it. Maybe it's Amazon, the world's biggest advertiser.
So we'll move back to that question you raised that the most successful companies don't advertise very much, although Amazon actually advertise a lot. They're actually a fairly major...
Do you know what percentage of the revenues they advertise?
No, that'll be revenues. It'll be relatively small because their revenues are
Isn't
immense.
that the true test?
Probably. Yeah. You're probably right.
Amazon spends around 3.5% of their revenue on advertising. Now, that's a little bit lower than the average of about 5%, but it's not that much lower. And the thing to remember is that when you're already spending more than anyone else and you have the largest excess share of voice of any company in the entire world, the gains you'll see by spending more will diminish very quickly. And they'll have smart people at Amazon who have figured that out. So if that's the true test, Amazon tests about normal. Now, one company that Scott talks about a bit is Nike. He says they're the best in the world at advertising, and he makes out that being good at advertising has seen them punished by the market.
Nike is at a 10-year low, their stock. Find me a company that has built their brand and sees their core competency as advertising. I'm going to show you a stock that's underperformed the market.
The thing is, Nike's downfall came after the period that they significantly reduced their advertising spend, especially in traditional media and brand building ads. They were a great advertiser doing very well, and then they turned away from advertising and their financial success plummeted. Now, it wasn't just the lack of advertising. They also reduced their physical availability by pulling out of retail stores. But what we know from all the evidence is that if you shift your spend away from brand building advertising, your growth and profitability will suffer exactly as it has for Nike. Scott often explains his crusade about brand and advertising being dead by talking about the hotel industry and how he personally chooses hotels not because of their brands, but by searching for the best hotels using TripAdvisor or AI.
I will now go on AI and say, what has the best gym in Berlin? Oh, it's the Soho House. What is the coolest old luxury place to take my wife? In France, Hotel du Cap. I don't need to defer to the brand anymore. The reality is technology has basically obviated the need for shorthand.
Scott says this is about technology giving us the ability to choose products on their own merits rather than defer to the shorthand of brand. So has this really happened? Has the rise of Google, then TripAdvisor, then AI really obviated the need for shorthand and resulted in people turning away from big hotel brands and towards those, lesser known brands that might have a better product? One way of assessing this is to look at the market share, the revenue growth, and the profitability of the leading hotel brands. The biggest players are Marriott and Hilton. They both have those big master brands and a ton of other well-known hotel brands in their portfolios. Both companies have grown their hotel market share from about 3% in 2000 to about 8% today. Marriott have grown their revenue from $14 billion in 2014 to $25 billion today, and their profit from $750 million in 2014 to $2.4 billion today. Hilton have grown their revenue from $10 billion in 2014 to $12 billion today, and their profit from $670 million in 2014 to $1.5 billion today. Now, what that tells us is that even if Scott is indeed booking a Hotel du Cap, most other people are booking brands they know, like Marriott and Hilton. And those brands are growing, which suggests more people are doing that, not less. Now, this really points to one of the things that Scott does, which he looks around himself, he looks at his own behavior, and he extrapolates that out to the market, which is something that we just shouldn't do. It's very unscientific to look at what's happening in our own lives and in our small circle, extrapolate that out and expect that to be the pattern that holds true across the whole market. And that's what's happening here. He's not being untruthful about his own experiences. It's just that you can't apply those experiences to everything and see those same things happen, those same patterns. In fact, they're very different. And like I said, I like so much of what Scott has to say. He's really great. But when it comes to marketing, brand building, and advertising, the sensational stuff that he says just doesn't hold water. In most cases, it's obviously and very provably wrong. So my advice, love Scott for the entertainment and for his often very wise and very thoughtful perspectives on societal issues. But take what he says about marketing with a grain of salt and pay attention to real evidence-based advice on how advertising works and how brands are built.